Now, a 100% tariff would fundamentally disrupt trade between the US and Brics nations. What impact could this have on the global supply chains in general?
Well, of course, if it happens, it would have an enormous impact. And keep in mind that Trump has been threatening tariffs on just about everything and everybody. The fact is that even a student in economics knows that the impact would be higher inflation. So we've got to look at this. Trump is not stupid, but he is crazy enough that most of his adversaries think that if he threatens these tariffs, he might actually do it. If Obama or Clinton had threatened him, nobody would believe them. But with Trump, they worry that he might be nuts enough to do it.
Well, Brics nations have been moving towards alternatives to the US dollar. Do you think such a threat or a warning could accelerate the process of the de-dollarization?
Yeah, we have heard this story for decades. The dollar is threatened. Something is going to replace the dollar. Chinese currency is going to replace the dollar. The euro is going to replace the dollar. And guess what? It never happens because most of the trade are done by businesses, and businesses get to choose what currency they want. Most of them choose the dollar because they have faith in US institutions, and they have faith in the institutions that will uphold the value of the dollar. Not so much true for in the case of China or some of the other currencies. So if history is a guide, we should not be too worried about these threats, and Trump's reaction to them are somewhat overblown.
Mhm. So, whether such a warning would be serious or a bluff, what long-term geopolitical ramifications do you think it will have if Brics nations start beginning to shift away from US economic influence?
Yeah, the point is they'll try to do it. They may try to do it, but efforts like this have not succeeded in the past because in free economies, which most of the world are, it is the business people who are going to choose what currency they want to use and what currency they trust. It is highly unlikely that countries like China, Saudi Arabia, which has recently become involved, and Brazil are going to dictate what currencies are being used. So, with all the problems in the world, this is not one I would take very seriously.
Mhm. Well, domestically, then, how might this affect the US economic policy domestically, especially in terms of trade relationships with other key nations?
In any event, should we impose tariffs like the ones he has been talking about for a long time, a 10% tariffs on just about everything that comes in the country, it is obvious that this would be inflationary and would raise the prices for just about everything the United States consumes, which is not exactly desirable for the Trump administration. So it is likely more of a threat than it is a reality, and it is unlikely that this will happen. But the simple answer to your question is that if it does happen, there will be retaliation by the countries affected, and they will start imposing tariffs on American and on whatever they import from the United States. And there will be a lot of upset businesses in the United States against the Trump administration if their items cost a lot more to export. So here again, I wouldn't be too concerned about this.
Mr. Tannis, you've mentioned that Brics Nation would still also try and shift the dynamics from the US relations. Now, what potential economic consequences or political ones could a shift in trade between the US and Brics nations have on the global financial system, particularly regarding foreign exchange reserves and investment flows?
70% of the nations of the world keep their reserves or most of their reserves in dollars, 70%. It is not likely to change by any of the measures that we are talking about, by the BRICS or other nations that are trying to make these changes. Again, the answer to your question is if they succeeded, it would probably have an effect on the value of the dollar. It would probably have an effect on international trade, but don't bet on it because it's not likely to happen.
Hmm. Then what do you think would be the increasing economic and political influence affect global organizations like the IMF or the World Bank? And what challenges could arise from reshaping this global governance structures?
Probably not much. Remember, the biggest contributor to the IMF and the World Bank is the United States, and we contributed it in dollars. So it's not likely that they would like to see another currency threaten the dollar's dominance. And once again, allow me to point out that we've been talking about this for decades, and so far it hasn't happened. So if you're betting on it, I would bet that the dollar is still going to be the predominantly used currency in world trade.
Hmm. Well, if BRICS nations strengthen their economic ties and form new trade agreements, how might this alter the competitive landscape for multinational corporations, particularly those based in the US?
It could have some effect given where the trade is, given the what all of them do. Mostly the big antagonist in all this is China. Uh, China wants to develop its trade and it needs strong trading partners. It has a problem with the United States now, so it is looking to other nations. For example, we talk about the BRICS, Brazil being a very important part of that. China is looking to strengthen its relationships with some of these other currencies and is probably the driving force behind all this. But again, whether they succeed or not is another question.
Mhm. So, do you think Donald Trump would still play into the hands of China this way?
Uh, well, playing into the hands, he is certainly going to confront them. And as I mentioned earlier, and this is really important, um, he's crazy enough that the threats that he makes have an effect because some of the people think that he might do something irrational. It is irrational to raise tariffs on just about everything that come into the United States. So it is more likely a trade, yeah, because he's crazy but not stupid. It's more likely these are negotiating stances more than anything else. The United States may well come out ahead in the negotiations, but it's certainly not going to be to the extent that he is threatening. I mean, the idea of a 60% tariff on everything that comes in from China when we import $500 billion worth of goods from China, the inflationary effect of that would be enormous, and Trump can't afford to let that happen.
Mhm.